My family called me crazy when I spent all my money to save my grandfather's legacy they sold off. Some people collect stamps. Others collect vintage watches or rare vinyl records. Me? I collect broken dreams, apparently. At least that's what my father would say. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon in my shoebox apartment in Orlando, the kind where you can make coffee from your bed and touch the bathroom door without getting up. I was working on a design for some corporate hotel chain, all beige, gray, and soulless, when my phone lit up with Aunt Marge's name. "Jason, honey, I hate to be the one to tell you this." Her voice was carrying that special tone, reserved for funerals and divorces. And just like that, my entire world flipped upside down. Dad and Uncle Larry had listed Grandpa's Sunshine Motor Lodge on some auction site for $25,000. The place where I spent every summer as a kid. The place that shaped me. And they didn't even bother to call me first. According to Aunt Marge, they were laughing about it over beers at the country club. Just some moldy junk. Let the developers bulldoze it. They said, $25,000. That's what they valued our family legacy at. Less than the price of their golf club memberships. I stared at the ceiling fan, making lazy circles above my head. My IKEA furniture suddenly felt even cheaper. My life even smaller. I was 30 years old, designing cookie-cutter interiors for faceless corporations, while the one place that ever felt authentic was about to be erased forever. The Sunshine wasn't just some roadside motel. It was freedom. It was magic. It was the smell of Central Florida orange blossoms mixing with the scent of Grandpa's ancient Chevy 78 after a day of fishing. I closed my eyes and I was 10 years old again. Summer of '93. Grandpa and I would wake up at dawn, grab his tackle box, and head out to Lake Jessup. By noon, we'd have a cooler full of bass. On the way back, we'd always stop at the motel, even though Grandpa's house was just 30 minutes away. "Gotta check on the business, Jace," he'd say with a wink, though I knew it was mostly for me. The Sunshine Motor Lodge stood proud on Route 17, its neon sign a beacon against the endless Florida sky. 12 rooms arranged in an L shape, a vending machine that sold Dr. Pepper for 25 cents, and the office where Grandpa kept a collection of road maps from every state. The place smelled like pine cleaner, sunscreen, and possibility. While he checked the books, I'd raid the vending machine and then head to his Chevy to play the Johnny Cash tapes he kept in the glove compartment. Sometimes we'd grab a couple fishing rods and walk behind the motel, where a small pond sat, teeming with bluegill too small to keep it fun to catch. "The money comes and goes, Jace," he'd tell me as we'd sit on plastic chairs outside room 1A, drinking soda warm from the sun. "But the stories you collect, that's the real wealth. The kind no one can ever take from you." I thought he was just being philosophical. Turns out, he was trying to prepare me. After Aunt Marge's call, I pulled up the auction listing on my phone. There was Sunshine Motor Lodge, prime development opportunity, great highway frontage, motivated sellers. The picture showed peeling paint, faded shag carpets, and a sagging roof. But all I saw was Grandpa showing me how to tie a fisherman's knot. All I heard was the fizz of soda, Ken's opening on hot afternoons. I scrolled through more photos. The office where Grandpa kept a jar of lollipops for kids. The pool now drained and cracked, but once my personal ocean. The vintage sign with its sun-shaped logo, half the bulbs now dark. Grandpa died 2 years ago. He always said he had a will, but after he passed, nobody could find it. Dad claimed Grandpa kept talking about updating it, but never got around to it. I suspected otherwise. Dad and Uncle Larry had plenty of time alone at the motel after the funeral. By law, everything went to his sons, my father and Uncle Larry, the same two people who visited the motel exactly once a year for the tax write-off. I called my dad immediately. He picked up on the 5th ring, sounding annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "It's a liability, Jason. Property taxes eating us alive. Place is falling apart. Nobody stays in these mom-and-pop motels anymore. They want Hampton Inns with free breakfast and USB ports." "You could have told me you were selling it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why? So you could what? Redesign it with your little swatches? Add some throw pillows?" He laughed. All you do is dream, son. The real world needs practical men who make practical decisions. In the background, I could hear Uncle Larry's voice. Tell the dreamer to stick to his HGTV fantasies. After I hung up, I paced my apartment for an hour, fuming. Then I opened my laptop and checked my bank account. $4,320. My 401k, $15,000. I looked at the listing again. Auction ending in 3 days. I'd like to say I had a smart, well-thought-out plan. But honestly, I just snapped. Something inside me couldn't bear the thought of some developer turning Grandpa's pride and joy into a strip mall or another cookie-cutter hotel. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Then I drove to the dealership and sold my Mini Cooper, the one indulgence I'd allowed myself when I landed the corporate design job. I withdrew every penny from my retirement account, kissing the penalties goodbye along with my planned Bahamas vacation. Then I marched into Florida First Bank with my tax returns and a half-baked business plan written at 3 a.m. By some miracle, the loan officer was a woman in her 60s who remembered staying at roadside motels on family trips. F88203K loan, she said, sliding a brochure across her desk. It's for fixer-uppers. Lower down payment, and you can roll renovation costs into mortgage. I'm pretty sure my credit score and income barely qualified, but she pushed it through. Sometimes you gotta bet on the jockey, not the horse, she told me with a wink. The auction was held online, but I drove to the motel anyway, parked across the street, and watched the place through my windshield as I refreshed the bidding page on my phone. Started at $25,000, jumped to $28,000, then $32,000. My hands were shaking by the time it hit $42,000. This was insane. I had liquidated my entire life for this crumbling building. 1 minute left. A new bid. $44,000 from Florida Develop 21. I typed in $45,000 and hit submit with 20 seconds to spare. The next 3 minutes were the longest in my life as I waited for someone to outbid me. But the screen just flashed, "Congratulations, you're the winning bidder." I sat there in my car, alternating between hysterical laughter and sheer panic. What had I done? I had no experience running a motel, no renovation skills, no partners, no backup plan. But I had a key. The real estate agent met me there an hour later, looking confused by my excitement. She handed over a ring of keys, a folder of ancient permits, and an emergency contact list with numbers probably disconnected since the Clinton administration. "Good luck," she said, eyeing the broken gutter hanging above us. The developer who lost the bid was going to bulldoze it for a gas station. At least it'll get a few more months of life. As she drove away, I stood in front of room 1A, Grandpa's unofficial office. The key stuck in the lock at first, but with a little jiggling, the door swung open. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, mildew, and underneath it all, the faint scent of pine cleaner Grandpa used. The room was exactly as I remembered, only faded. The same turquoise bedspread, the same landscape painting of the Everglades, even the same ancient TV with rabbit ears. I walked to the main office and found a breaker box. One by one, I flipped the switches, holding my breath. To my surprise, the lights flickered on. The electricity hadn't been disconnected. I stepped outside just as dusk was falling and hit the final switch. The neon sign sputtered reluctantly to life, but only parts of it worked. Instead of Sunshine Motor Lodge vacancy, it now read San G. Vaca. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, Grandpa looks like I'm on a vaca, all right. A vacation from sanity. I could almost hear his voice in my head. When in doubt, Jace, dig deeper. There's always treasure at the bottom. That night, I slept in room 1A on the dusty bed. No sheets, no pillow, just me fully clothed on top of a bedspread that had seen better days decades ago. But somehow, it was the most peaceful sleep I'd had in years. I was awoken by my phone buzzing. Text from Dad. "Larry told me what you did. You're out of your mind. That place will bleed you dry." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked outside to catch the sunrise, something I hadn't done since the last time I went fishing with Grandpa. The Florida dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air smelled of dew and nearby orange groves. For a moment, everything felt possible. Then I heard a scratching sound from inside room 3. The door was ajar, and as I approached, I saw a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. A raccoon was casually exiting through a broken window, carrying what appeared to be the remains of a decades-old candy bar. Well, at least someone's enjoying the amenities, I muttered. I took a deep breath and looked down at the key in my hand. The old brass key to room 1A. My 401k was gone. My car was gone. My safety net was gone. But standing there in the golden morning light, watching my first guest make his escape, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. I had no idea that the raccoon would turn out to be the least of my problems. No clue that the real monsters weren't hiding in the walls, but in inspection reports, legal letters, and family betrayals waiting just around the corner. But that morning, with the smell of orange blossoms in the air and the ghost of Grandpa's Chevy still haunting the parking lot, I was exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest adventures, or the most spectacular failures. I was about to find out which. I thought raccoons would be my biggest problem. Boy, was I wrong. The morning after my furry visitor, I woke up feeling oddly optimistic. The Florida sunshine streamed through the dusty blinds of room 1A, and I actually had a plan. Clean the place up, slap on some fresh paint, update the bathrooms, and voila, retro motel magic. I'd even started sketching designs on the back of the property paperwork. Then my doorbell rang at precisely 8:15 a.m. Standing there in a pressed white shirt and clipboard was a man who introduced himself as Tom Bailey from the county building inspector's office. Apparently, my purchase had triggered an automatic inspection requirement. Something about change of commercial ownership and safety compliance verification. Just routine, he assured me as he put on a dust mask before stepping inside. 2 hours later, Tom wasn't smiling anymore. He handed me a preliminary report that looked like a Stephen King novel. Terrifying and way too long. Let's start with the good news, he said. The foundation is solid. I waited for more good news. There wasn't any. Instead, there was asbestos in the walls and ceilings, black mold behind the bathroom tiles, electrical wiring that violated at least 6 modern codes, plumbing that Tom described as creative at best, catastrophic at worst. And the kicker, no ADA-compliant access ramps or bathrooms. You'll need to address these issues before you can legally open for business, he said, flipping through his clipboard. Ballpark estimate, probably around $80,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. $80,000. I had exactly $4,216.72 left in my checking account. What happens if I can't afford that right now? I asked, trying to sound casual. You got 3 options, Tom said. Fix it. Face escalating daily fines until the county condemns the property, or demolish it. As he drove away, I sat on the cracked concrete by the empty pool, staring at the report. Well, I muttered to myself, at least the raccoon isn't going to sue me for unsafe living conditions. I spent that night on my laptop, researching asbestos removal and ADA compliance. The costs were even worse than Tom suggested. By midnight, I was considering whether my father and uncle had been right all along. Maybe this was just a money pit wrapped in nostalgia. That's when my college buddy Kevin called. He'd seen my Facebook status update about buying a motel and wanted to check if I completely lost my mind. Probably I told him and explained my current predicament. Kevin wasn't just my friend. He was also a social media marketing guru for some tech startup in Austin. The kind of guy who knew what was trending before it actually started trending. Dude, this is gold, he said after hearing about my situation. People love renovation stories, especially retro ones. You need to get on TikTok. I laughed. I'm 30, Kev. Isn't TikTok for teenagers doing dance challenges? That was 3 years ago. Grandpa. Now it's for everyone. And renovation content is huge. Trust me, I had nothing to lose. The next morning, I created a TikTok account called Retro Motel Revival and filmed myself walking to the motel, showing all its problems while narrating with self-deprecating humor. I added some 80s synth music in the background and ended with a shot of the half-lit neon sign. I expected maybe 50 views. By lunchtime, it had 87,000. What the heck? I texted Kevin. Told you. Now monetize it. Link a GoFundMe. Make more content. The next day, I borrowed a hazmat suit from a contractor friend and filmed myself starting to remove the old wallpaper in room 2, looking like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man's slimmer cousin. I said it to Backstreet Boys, I want that way, and captioned it. POV! You spent your life savings on a 1950s motel and then discovered it's trying to kill you. 3 million views in 24 hours. My follower count went from 0 to 127,000 overnight. The comments section exploded. This is the motel my parents took us to in 1987. Is that really still the same carpet? Gen Z here, but this place gives me nostalgic vibes for an era I never experienced. Dude, my grandparents had their honeymoon in a place just like this. The GoFundMe wasn't exactly showering me with cash, but it was slowly growing. I was up to about $7,800 in donations when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. It was from my father, who had tagged me in a post as golf buddies. My designer son is now painting mauve pink to hide the rot in his money pit. Some people never learn that dreams don't pay bills. #reality check. The comments were worse. Uncle Larry chiming in with stories about how I'd always been impractical. Dad's friends laughing about millennial restoration projects and how I'd be bankrupt by summer. What really caught my eye, though, was a comment from someone named Richard Delaney. Prime highway frontage. Shame to waste it on nostalgia. Call me when reality sets in. A quick Google search revealed he was one of the biggest commercial real estate developers in Central Florida. I slammed my laptop shut and headed outside to cool off. The afternoon sun was beating down on the motel's faded facade, and I started ripping out some overgrown bushes to channel my frustration. That's when I heard a voice behind me. You're going to want to save those. They're native Florida jasmine. Very hard to find these old varieties. I turned around to see a woman about my age standing there, holding a large tablet and what looked like a laser measuring device. She wore jeans, boots, and a t-shirt that said form follows function, but vintage never dies. I'm Emily Clark, she said, architect, preservation specialist, and apparently your new voluntary consultant. I can't afford a consultant, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead, voluntary or otherwise. I'm not here to charge you, she said. I'm here because my grandmother wouldn't stop talking about your TikToks. She spent her honeymoon in this motel in 1973 and has been showing me this picture all morning. She held up her phone, displaying a faded Polaroid of a young couple standing in front of the Sunshine Motor Lodge. The sign was fully lit back then, and there were flower boxes under every window. She said it smelled like coconut suntan lotion and freedom. Emily continued, whatever that means. Anyway, I work with historical buildings, and I can help you with ADA compliance plans. Pro bono. Over the next few days, Emily became my unofficial partner in crime. She brought her 3D scanning equipment and created detailed plans for wheelchair ramps that would maintain the motel's retro aesthetic. She knew contractors who specialized in historical renovations and could handle asbestos removal for half what I'd been quoted. While we worked, she told me about her own passion for preserving America's roadside architecture. How these places weren't just buildings, but cultural landmarks that told the story of American mobility and optimism. Your grandfather built more than a motel, she said one evening as we sat outside room 1A, drinking beers and looking at her designs. He built a time capsule. Meanwhile, my TikTok following kept growing. Each video of me fumbling through basic repairs while learning as I went seemed to resonate with people. I wasn't some HGTV expert with a perfect solution for everything. I was just a guy trying to save something meaningful while having no idea what I was doing. The comments became a weird mix of renovation advice, nostalgia stories, and people offering to drive across the country to stay at the motel once it reopened. For the first time since I bought the place, I was starting to think this crazy gamble might actually work out. Then came the double gut punch. First, my girlfriend Brooke finally returned my calls. I'd been texting her updates about the motel project for days, sending her my TikTok videos, asking for her opinion on color schemes. She'd been mostly silent, which I'd attributed to her busy schedule at the real estate office. "Jason, we need to talk," she began, never a good sign. "I think we should take a break. This motel thing, it's just so impulsive. I need stability, a partner with a plan, not someone who throws away their career on a whim." I wanted to argue, to explain that this wasn't a whim, but a passion. Before I could, she continued, "Richard says the property isn't even zoned correctly for what you want to do." Richard? Richard Delaney? The developer who commented on my dad's post. "He's a client," she said quickly. "A very successful one. He says motels like yours are dying all over the country. It's just business reality, Jason." The second punch came later that night, as I was scrolling through Instagram, trying to distract myself from the breakup. There was Brooke, on a yacht in Miami, champagne in hand, with Richard Delaney's arm around her waist. The caption read, "Choosing stability over dreams. Hashtag leveled up, hashtag real estate power." I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach. We'd been together for 2 years, and apparently, I was worth less than a business connection. Emily found me the next morning, sitting by the empty pool, staring at Brooke's Instagram post. "Wanted to tell you she's not worth it?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Is that what people normally say in this situation?" "Usually, but I think you already know that." She glanced at my phone. "Her loss, Jason. Let's make this place legendary just to spite her." And for some reason, that simple comment hit harder than any sympathetic platitude could have. I put my phone away and got back to work. We spent the day removing the damaged ceiling tiles from the office, discovering a beautiful wooden beadboard underneath that had been hidden for decades. By sunset, I had a new TikTok posted, a freshly scanned set of architectural plans from Emily, and a growing determination to prove everyone wrong. My father, Uncle, Brooke, and especially Richard Delaney. But around 2 a.m., a loud crash woke me from a dead sleep. I ran outside in my boxers and t-shirt to find one of the vintage lampposts that lined the motel's walkway smashed on the ground. Glass everywhere, metal bent. As I stood there trying to figure out if it had been wind or vandalism, I noticed a small piece of paper tucked into what remained of the lamp fixture. I pulled it out and read the neatly printed message. "Sell while it's still standing." The handwriting looked suspiciously like Richard Delaney's signature that I'd seen on a business card tucked into Brooke's Instagram photo. Seemed like the developer wasn't done trying to get his hands on this property. I stood there in the Florida night, looking down at that smashed lamp, realizing that Richard Delaney might be my most immediate problem. But I had no idea that within a week, I'd receive a letter proving that even Mickey Mouse could bite harder than a greedy real estate developer ever could. The broken lamp was just the beginning of my problems. I spent the next morning sweeping up glass and installing a security camera system that Emily found on clearance. We were both pretty sure Richard Delaney was behind the vandalism, but without proof, there wasn't much we could do except stay vigilant. What I didn't realize was that an even bigger threat was brewing, one with much bigger ears and far more lawyers. A week after the lamp incident, I was sitting in room 1A, editing my latest TikTok video. We'd been documenting our discovery of original 1950s bathroom tiles hidden under the cheap 80s renovations. The video showed me carefully removing panels to reveal pristine aqua and pink ceramic squares underneath. While I was choosing background music, I heard the mail truck outside. Nothing exciting, just the usual pile of bills and flyers, except for one official-looking envelope with a return address that made my stomach drop. Disney Enterprises Incorporated Legal Department. I tore it open, thinking it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. The letter, written in intimidating legalese, informed me that one of my TikTok videos had shown unauthorized display of Disney intellectual property and constituted willful copyright infringement. They demanded I immediately remove all Disney content, issue a public apology, and pay $50,000 in damages. $50,000 for showing some old posters. The video in question was one I'd filmed in the motel lobby. While removing wood paneling, we discovered a wall where Grandpa had pasted vintage Disneyland posters from the 1960s, advertisements for the Enchanted Tiki Room, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Frontierland. They were originals, slightly faded but still colorful, preserved behind the paneling for decades. I've been thrilled by the find, calling it a time capsule of American tourism. Apparently, the House of Mouse didn't share my enthusiasm. "Mickey, you were my childhood friend." I muttered to the letter. "Now you want my kidneys?" I immediately called the only lawyer I knew, my second cousin Frank, who handled divorces in Tampa. He wasn't much help. "Disney doesn't mess around," he said. "They've got more lawyers and I've got gray hairs, and I'm mostly bald now. My advice? Pay it. Maybe they'll negotiate down to $30,000. I hung up and stared at my bank account. $4,112.38. The GoFundMe for the renovations was up to about $12,000, nowhere near the $50,000 Disney wanted, let alone the $80,000 the inspector said I needed for repairs. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Heard about your Disney problem. Ready to admit this was all a mistake yet." Then another. "Larry and I will buy it back from you. $20,000. Best offer you'll get." They were offering $25,000 less than what I'd paid at auction, but with the Disney threat looming, it was starting to look like my only option. I didn't respond. Instead, I found myself wandering through the empty motel rooms, touching the walls Grandpa had built, looking at the vintage fixtures we'd been carefully restoring. In room 5, I sat on the bare mattress and pulled out an old Polaroid of Grandpa and me standing in front of the motel, both of us holding fishing rods. "Maybe they're right," I said to the photo. "Maybe some dreams aren't practical." I was still sitting there when Emily found me. She took one look at the Disney letter, and her face hardened. "This is ridiculous. They're bullying you because they can. They're a multi-billion-dollar corporation protecting their intellectual property." I said, hating how defeated I sounded. "And I'm just some guy with a falling-apart motel and a TikTok account." Emily wasn't having it. She grabbed her phone and started filming me sitting there with the letter. "Tell them about your grandfather," she said. "Tell them about what this place means." So I did. I talked about Grandpa building the motel in the 1950s, how he'd been so proud when Florida tourism boomed after Disney World opened, how he'd kept those Disney posters as a tribute to the company that had brought so many families to Florida, how he'd send guests to Disney World with hand-drawn maps and discount ticket coupons he'd arranged with local businesses. He wasn't stealing from Disney, I said toward the end. He was one of their biggest fans. Emily posted the video with the caption, "The Last American Dream Motel versus." The mouse hashtag Save Sunshine hashtag David versus Goliath, and tagged every news outlet and influencer she could think of. By morning, it had over 5 million views. By noon, it was being covered on local Florida news stations. By dinner, several major news outlets had picked up the story. Disney demands $50,000 from small motel owner preserving vintage posters. Emily and I decided to double down. We set up a new GoFundMe specifically for the Disney situation, titling it "Help Save the Sunshine Motel from Corporate Bullying." She wrote a detailed description explaining both the Disney threat and the renovation needs. Then we waited, hoping for maybe a few $1,000s that might let us hire a real lawyer. We were not prepared for what happened next. The internet exploded, not just on TikTok, but across platforms. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, everywhere people were sharing our story. Vintage motel enthusiasts. Disney fans upset with corporate overreach. Route 66 preservation societies. Classic car clubs. Baby boomers reminiscing about family road trips before the era of cookie-cutter hotel chains. In 72 hours, the GoFundMe hit $120,000. The comments on the donations were what really got me. My parents took us to motels just like this on our way to Disney World in 1975. Saving your memories to honor mine, $50. Corporate America has forgotten what made this country special. Keep fighting, $100. My motorcycle club will be making Sunshine Motel a stop on our next Florida tour, $420. A 92-year-old man from Texas donated $500 with the note, "Don't let Disney steal our memories." My first honeymoon was in a motor lodge just like yours. The most surprising support came from former Disney employees who shared stories about the company's history. Many pointed out that Walt Disney himself had deep nostalgia for early 20th century Americana, the very thing my motel represented. The media attention also brought unexpected allies. 3 different law firms specializing in intellectual property offered to represent us pro bono. Preservation societies reached out with grant opportunities. A popular home renovation show contacted us about featuring the motel in their upcoming season. For the first time since buying a motel, I felt like the universe was confirming I'd made the right choice. While Emily coordinated with the lawyers and media requests, I focused on continuing the renovations. We were clearing out the old manager's apartment above the office when I found something tucked away in the back of a closet. A dusty wooden box with faded letters burned into the top. For Jace, when in doubt. My heart nearly stopped. That was Grandpa's nickname for me. The box was locked, but the key to room 1A fit perfectly. Inside was a letter, yellow with age but preserved in a plastic sleeve. It was dated just 6 months before Grandpa passed away. "Dear Jace, if you're reading this, you've either taken over the motel like I always hoped, or you're clearing out my things after I'm gone. I'm betting on the first option, because you always understood what this place really means. Money comes and goes, but memory is like a good vinyl record. It plays forever if you take care of it. This motel isn't just cinder blocks and neon. It's stories. It's families singing along to the radio on their way to the beach. It's newlyweds and retirees, and everyone in between. Whatever challenges you're facing, remember that nothing worthwhile comes easy. When I built this place, people said I was crazy. Why build way out here? They asked. 20 years later, they called me lucky when the highways brought people past our doors. It wasn't luck. It was faith in America's love affair with the open road. Inside this box is the original key to room 1A, made in 1958. I've kept it all these years as a reminder that sometimes the old ways still work just fine. Love, always, Grandpa. Beneath the letter was a brass key with a small sun engraved on it, hanging from a faded red plastic tag with 1A stamped into it. I sat on the dusty floor holding that key, tears streaming down my face like I was 8 years old again. Also in the box were original blueprints for the motel, photographs from its grand opening, and a ledger showing the first year's guests. I carefully gathered everything and brought it downstairs to Emily. She was on the phone with one of the volunteer lawyers, but hung up when she saw my face. "Good news," she said. "The lawyer thinks Disney will settle. They're getting destroyed in the press," and she stopped when she noticed the box. "What's that?" I couldn't even speak. I just handed her Grandpa's letter. As she read it, her expression softened. "Jason, this is wow." "Yeah," I managed, still clutching the brass key. Seems like he knew someday I'd need a sign. The next week was a whirlwind. Our lawyer negotiated with Disney, and we reached a settlement. We would remove the posters, carefully preserving them in storage, and in exchange, they reduced their demand from $50,000 to $10,000. It was still a lot of money, but with the GoFundMe success, we could afford it and have plenty left over for renovations. But the real question was what to do with the additional funds. We'd promised donors we'd use the money to save the motel, but we now had more than we needed for the basic repairs. Emily had been thinking bigger. "What about the vacant lot next door?" she suggested one evening as we sorted through Grandpa's box of memorabilia. "It's been for sale for years. We could expand." The idea took root immediately. The extra land would let us add something the original motel never had, a small drive-in movie theater where we could show classic films. I could almost see it. Vintage cars parked in the stars, the glow of the screen, the smell of popcorn. We called it Memory Lane, a place where the past wasn't just remembered but experienced. With the remaining funds, we secured a loan for the adjacent property and started planning the drive-in. Emily's architect friends helped design a layout that preserved the retro aesthetic while meeting modern codes. We found a company that specialized in refurbishing old drive-in equipment. As the renovations continued, the motel started looking less like a disaster and more like the place I remember from childhood. The neon sign was fully restored, glowing against the Florida sky. The first 5 rooms were nearly completed, with period-appropriate furnishings we'd found at estate sales and vintage shops. Our TikTok following had grown to over 2 million, with people across the country invested in our journey. One afternoon, Emily returned from the county records office with a stack of papers and a strange expression on her face. "You need to see this," she said, spreading architectural drawings across the hood of my car. There were detailed plans dated 1972 for something called Sunshine Americana, a modest theme park centered around a motel. There were designs for a small Ferris wheel, a collection of classic cars, a 1950s diner, and various other attractions celebrating mid-century American road culture. "Your grandfather filed these with the county," Emily explained. "He got preliminary approval, but never went through with it. I found correspondence suggesting he ran into funding issues when gas prices soared during the oil crisis." I stared at the yellowed papers, seeing Grandpa's handwriting in the margins, notes about authentic American experience and preserving the golden age of the open road. "He had the same dream we do," I said quietly, "just 50 years earlier." As I looked at those old drawings, imagining the neon-lit park of my grandfather's dreams, I felt a connection across time. I was finishing what he had started. What I didn't know was that while the motel was beginning to shine again with its newly restored sign, my family was about to decide they wanted their piece of the glory. 6 months after finding Grandpa's plans, the Sunshine Motor Lodge looked nothing like the rundown building I'd purchased at auction. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, especially considering I'd started with just a dream and a maxed-out credit card. The neon sign now blazed fully restored against the Florida sky, no longer reading Vaca, but proudly announcing vacancy to passing travelers. The aqua and pink color scheme had been meticulously restored. Palm trees lined the freshly paved parking lot, and classic 50s deck chairs sat outside each room. The grand opening was scheduled for Memorial Day weekend, the unofficial start of summer and peak Florida tourism season. Emily and I had been working 18-hour days for weeks, finalizing details, coordinating with vendors, and making sure everything was perfect. Perfection isn't a word I normally use, but pulling into the parking lot on opening morning, I couldn't think of a better description. The morning sun caught the chrome detailing we'd added to the office facade. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the awnings. A vintage 1957 Chevy Bel Air, borrowed from a local collector, was parked prominently by the entrance. My hands were trembling as I unlocked the office with Grandpa's original brass key. In a few hours, the place would be filled with people, not just TikTok followers or curious locals, but paying guests who had booked weeks in advance. I walked around the property one last time, taking it all in, the 12 renovated rooms, each with period-appropriate furnishings, but equipped with discreetly modern amenities. The small Mom's Diner we built beside the office, with its black and white checker floor and red vinyl booths. The jukebox stocked with Elvis, Buddy Holly, and Chuck Berry. And of course, Memory Lane, the drive-in theater we built on the adjacent lot. The giant screen stood ready for that night's showing of Grease. The concession stand was stocked with popcorn, candy, and sodas in glass bottles. Speaker poles dotted the parking area, though we'd also installed a radio transmitter for modern cars without window speakers. This wasn't just a motel renovation anymore. We created a full 1950s American experience, exactly what Grandpa had envisioned with his Sunshine Americana plans. The only thing missing was him. At precisely 10 a.m., the county sheriff, a burly man named Davis, who became one of our biggest supporters, cut the ribbon stretched across the entrance. A small crowd cheered as Emily and I stood grinning like idiots, barely believing this moment had actually arrived. The first guests were a retired couple from Michigan who had stayed at the original Sunshine on their honeymoon in 1969. They'd driven their RV all the way down after following our restoration journey online. The woman actually cried when I handed them the key to room 1B, right next to Grandpa's special room 1A, which we preserved as a mini museum of the motel's history. Throughout the day, a steady stream of people arrived. Some were staying overnight, Others just came to look around, have a milkshake at the diner, and take photos. A local news crew showed up to do a live segment. Emily's architectural preservation colleagues brought champagne. By afternoon, Mom's diner was serving its signature road trip pancakes to a packed house. The jukebox never stopped playing. Kids ran around the property while their parents reminisced about family vacations from their own childhoods. I kept looking for problems to solve, but for once, everything was running smoothly. When dusk fell, the neon came alive, casting its warm glow over property. Cars began filling the drive-in lot for the inaugural screening. Some people showed up in poodle skirts and leather jackets, fully embracing the 1950s theme. I filmed a quick TikTok walking through property, ending with a shot of the illuminated drive-in screen as the familiar opening notes of Grease began to play. That single video would later hit 12 million views, more than all our renovation videos combined. As people settled in for the movie, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. I found a quiet spot behind the concession stand and looked up at the stars. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "Talking to yourself already? That usually doesn't start until the second week of business ownership," Emily said, appearing beside me with 2 root beers and frosted mugs. She looked different that night. She'd embraced the 50s theme with a vintage sundress, and her hair pulled back with a scarf. But it was more than the outfit. There was a lightness to her I hadn't seen before. The same feeling that was bubbling up inside me. Pride. We clinked mugs and watched as John Travolta strutted across the massive screen, the sound of vintage car horns honking in appreciation. I couldn't help laughing at the sheer absurdity of what we'd accomplished. 6 months ago, I was a corporate interior designer with a 401k and a sensible apartment. Now I was standing in the middle of a time machine I'd built out of my childhood memories. Official dealer nostalgia, I said with a grin. Who would have thought? The next few weeks exceeded even our wildest expectations. Every room was booked solid. The drive-in sold out each night. TikTok followers came from across the country for photos and stayed for the experience. Then came the call that changed everything again. "Is this Jason Miller?" "This is Barbara Lowell from AARP Travel," said the voice on the phone one Tuesday morning. I assumed they wanted to feature us in their magazine. We'd already done interviews with several travel publications. But Barbara had something much bigger in mind. "Our members go crazy for nostalgic experiences," she explained. "We're looking to create a series of guided tours centered around authentic Americana, and your property would be the perfect cornerstone." The contract they offered was staggering. $800,000 upfront to secure the Sunshine as the exclusive overnight destination for their Golden Age of Travel tour series. They would bring busloads of retirees through every week, guaranteeing full occupancy during even the slowest tourism months. I signed the papers with a surreal feeling, remembering how just months ago I'd been scraping together change for ramen noodles after spending my last dollar on asbestos removal. The restoration business is booming. I joked to Emily that night. Who needs cryptocurrency when you've got nostalgia? The AARP deal made headlines in the local business papers, which is probably how my father and Uncle Larry found out about it. They arrived unannounced on a busy Saturday afternoon. I was helping at the concession stand when I spotted them walking to the parking lot like they owned the place, which I guess they thought they should have. Dad looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his golf polo. Uncle Larry looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Behind them trailed a thin man carrying a briefcase, who I immediately pegged as a lawyer. "Quite the operation you've got here," Uncle Larry said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Seems to be doing well." "Very well," agreed the lawyer, extending his hand. "Martin Greenberg. I represent your father and uncle in financial matters. They insisted we talk in private, so I took them to the small office behind the check-in desk. The space was cramped with the 4 of us, especially with the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "We've come with a proposition," Mr. Greenberg began, opening his briefcase. "Or rather, to assert certain rights my clients retain in this property." He slid a document across the desk. Legal jargon filled the page, but the gist was clear enough. They were claiming that since the motel had originally been their inheritance from Grandpa, they were entitled to 50% of all profits generated by the business. "You've done well with our property," Dad said, as if trying to soften the blow. "But this is still a family asset. We're just asking for what's fair." I felt my face growing hot. "Fair? You sold this place at auction. You called it trash. You laughed when I bought it. We gave you the opportunity." Uncle Larry snapped. "Without us putting it up for auction, you wouldn't have any of this. You're ungrateful." The irony was almost laughable. They tried to throw away Grandpa's legacy for pocket change, mocked me for trying to save it, and now that it was successful, they wanted to cash in. I heard Grandpa's voice in my head. "Money shows who people really are, Jace, but love mends the tears." I took a deep breath and looked at my father. Really looked at him. Behind the entitlement, I saw something else. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was shame at having undervalued something his own father had built. Whatever it was, it gave me an idea. "I'll offer you 5% of the profits," I said, "on one condition." The lawyer started to object, but I held up my hand. "The condition is that you personally oversee the construction of our new RV park addition. We need the space for the AARP tour buses, and you've got construction experience, Dad." Uncle Larry scoffed. "Working for free? Forget it." But my father didn't immediately dismiss the idea. He looked around the office, taking the framed photos of Grandpa that lined the walls. "I'll think about it," he said finally, ignoring Uncle Larry's glare. After they left, Emily found me staring at the contract they'd left behind. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, just realizing some people never change. And some people might. That night was our weekly showing of American Graffiti at the drive-in. It had become a tradition to showcase different classic films, but this one was special. It perfectly captured the American cruising culture that inspired Sunshine Americana. The lot was packed with vintage cars, their radios tuned to our station as the familiar scenes played out on the big screen. The night air was warm, filled with the smell of popcorn and the distant scent of orange blossoms. I found Emily by the concession stand, illuminated by the glow of the screen and the neon lights. Something about that moment, with the film playing, the success surrounding us, and the journey we'd shared, made everything crystal clear. I'd been carrying Grandpa's room key with me every day since finding it. I'd had a jeweler drill a small hole for the non-functional end and thread it onto a vintage-style chain. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right. As Richard Dreyfuss's character in the movie headed off to college, leaving his small town behind, I took Emily's hand and led her to a quiet spot away from the crowd. "You know I couldn't have done any of this without you," I said, suddenly nervous despite rehearsing this moment in my head for weeks. I got down on one knee, holding up the necklace with Grandpa's key catching the light from the screen. "You didn't just save this motel," I told her. "You saved me from giving up on the most important thing in my life. Would you marry me?" Her yes was nearly drowned out by the honking of car horns. Apparently our little moment wasn't as private as I'd thought. Several cars had turned their headlights toward us, and people were clapping and cheering. I slipped the chain around her neck as she kissed me, and for the first time in my life, I felt Grandpa's approving presence as strongly as if he were standing right beside us. The next morning, still riding high on happiness and lack of sleep, I was checking in new guests when my phone started blowing up with notifications. At first, I thought it was just more congratulations. News of our engagement had spread quickly through our online community. But then I saw a text from our lawyer. "Call me immediately." TMZ article. My stomach dropped as I pulled up the entertainment news site. There was in bold, clickbait font, "Designer scam fans. GoFundMe money built personal resort, not preservation project." The article was filled with half-truths and outright lies. It claimed I'd used donation money to build a private playground instead of simply preserving the motel. It suggested the AARP deal was arranged for the fundraiser, implying I'd known about the potential profit all along. It even questioned whether the Disney legal threat had been exaggerated to generate sympathy. Accompanying the story were photos of Emily and me celebrating at the opening, along with screenshots of our GoFundMe page juxtaposed with images of the drive-in theater, as if adding that feature was somehow fraudulent. At the bottom of the article was a quote from a family member who wished to remain anonymous, claiming I had manipulated the public's nostalgia for personal gain while shutting out my own family from their rightful inheritance. I didn't need 3 guesses to figure out who that anonymous family member was. Uncle Larry's vindictiveness had reached new heights. As I stood there under the neon sign, Emily's hand in mine, I could feel my blood boiling. Everything we'd worked for was being threatened by lies and jealousy. But something else was clear, too. I wasn't going to let TMZ or Uncle Larry extinguish the light we'd reignited at Sunshine Americana. The time had come to fight for the truth. I've never considered myself a fighter. Growing up, I was always a kid who designed forts rather than defending them. But seeing that TMZ headline, watching someone try to tear down everything we'd built, awakened something primal in me. The article hit us like a hurricane. By noon, our phone was ringing nonstop. Not with reservations, but with cancellations. Our social media accounts were flooded with comments from former supporters now questioning our integrity. Several guests already checked and were demanding refunds, looking at us like we were scam artists. Emily found me in room 1A, sitting on the bed, staring at Grandpa's framed photo. "Bookings are down 30% since this morning," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The AARP people want an emergency call to discuss the situation." I nodded numbly, scrolling to the seemingly endless negative comments on our TikTok. People who cheered us on for months were now calling us frauds. The whiplash was disorienting. "We could sue for defamation," I suggested weakly. "By the time a lawsuit finishes, we'd be bankrupt," Emily replied. "Besides, you can win a public relations battle in a courtroom." She sat beside me, her engagement key necklace catching the afternoon light. "You need to show them who you really are, Jason." She was right, of course. The Sunshine story had resonated with people because it was authentic. Because I was authentic. No PR firm or lawyer could fix this. I needed to be as transparent as those big windows in the diner. "Get me the receipt folder and the accountant on the phone," I said, finally finding my resolve. "We're going live tonight." For the next 4 hours, Emily and I gathered every receipt, every bank statement, every contract related to motel renovation. We spread them across the diner's counter, creating a paper trail that documented every dollar spent. Our accountant sent over detailed spreadsheets breaking down the GoFundMe allocations. At 7 p.m., with my hand shaking slightly, I hit the Go Live button on TikTok. No script, no fancy lighting, just me sitting at the diner counter with mountains of financial documents. "Hey everyone, I'm Jason Miller, and apparently I'm a scammer, at least according to TMZ." For the next hour, I walked through everything. I showed the original inspection report detailing the $80,000 in required repairs. I displayed bank statements proving I'd spent my life savings before the fundraiser even began. I held up the Disney settlement agreement, the asbestos removal invoices, and the land purchase contract for the drive-in. I even revealed that we donated $20,000 in the GoFundMe to the Veterans Route 66 Preservation Fund, something we hadn't publicized because, as I explained on the stream, Grandpa believed good deeds lose their power when you brag about them. Toward the end, my voice cracked a little. The truth is, I never expected any of this to become so big. I just wanted to save a place that mattered to me, a place that tells a story about who we were and who we can still be. Every penny from that fundraiser went into preserving that story. I held up the key necklace I'd given Emily. This motel isn't just a business to me. It's a promise to my grandfather. A promise I intend to keep, no matter what TMZ or anyone else says. The live stream ended with over 200,000 concurrent viewers. The comment section, which had been accessible that morning, transformed before our eyes. My family drove Route 66 3 times when I was a kid. Places like yours were our whole vacation. Don't let the haters win. TMZ is trash. Sunshine forever. I donated $50 to your GoFundMe and would do it again. You saved my memories of road trips with my dad, who passed last year. Within hours, Hashtag Save Sunshine was trending nationally. Our supporters were fighting back against the TMZ narrative across all platforms. Several travel bloggers who had visited the motel posted lengthy defenses of our project. By morning, the tide had turned dramatically. Bookings started coming in again. The AARP representative called to confirm they were standing by our contract, citing overwhelming positive response from our members. 3 days later, TMZ quietly updated their article with additional context that essentially walked back most of their accusations. No apology, of course, but the damage control was obvious. Our lawyer told us they received a flood of complaints, including some from very influential people who had fallen in love with the Sunshine story. I was exhausted but relieved. The crisis appeared to be over, at least the public one. Then my father showed up alone. I was replacing light bulbs in the parking lot when his BMW pulled in. He looked older somehow, more subdued than during his previous visit with Uncle Larry and the lawyer. "Got a minute?" he asked, and we walked to the diner, which was closed between lunch and dinner. We sat across from each other in a booth, the awkwardness between us thick enough to cut with a knife. He fidgeted with a paper napkin, folding and unfolding it methodically. Larry leaked the story to TMZ. He finally said, to one of his golf buddies who knows someone there. I nodded. I'd already guessed as much, but hearing the confirmation still stung. I knew he was going to do something, but I didn't know what until it was done. My father looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I should have stopped him. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from my father, it was the closest thing to one I'd ever received. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He glanced around the diner, taking in the vintage Coca-Cola signs and chrome fixtures. "Your grandfather used to bring me here as a kid, before it was a diner, just the office back then. He'd let me sort the mail while he did the books." I'd never heard this story before. My father rarely talked about his childhood. "I was jealous," he continued, "not of the motel or the money, but of your faith in this place, in what it represents." He paused. In him. The admission hung in the air between us. My father, the practical businessman who'd always dismissed my impractical dreams, was saying he envied my connection to Grandpa. "I saw your live stream," he said after a while. "The things you said about my father, about memories being more valuable than money." He shook his head slightly. "You sounded just like him." For the first time, I recognized something in my father's expression. Regret, yes, but also something like pride. "That offer you made," he said, "the 5% for overseeing the RV park construction, is it still on the table?" I wasn't prepared for this. "You're serious?" I ran the numbers. "It's fair." He straightened his shoulders. "And I know something about construction that might actually be useful for once." We shook hands across the table, and while it wasn't exactly a Hallmark movie reconciliation, it was a start. As he was leaving, he mentioned that Uncle Larry had headed to Vegas after the TMZ article backfired, apparently to cool off, but more likely to gamble away his frustration. With the public relations crisis averted and a tentative peace established with my father, we could focus on what really mattered. Emily and I had a wedding to plan. We chose the drive-in theater as our venue, with the ceremony scheduled for sunset, so the neon lights would provide a romantic backdrop as darkness fell. Emily found a vintage 1950s wedding dress that looked like it came straight out of an old movie, and I tracked down a classic blue suit that Grandpa would have approved of. The guest list included everyone who had helped make Sunshine Americana possible, from the local contractors who'd given us discounts to the TikTok followers who'd driven across multiple states just to support us. On the big day, classic cars filled the parking lot. The movie screen displayed a slideshow of our renovation journey interspersed with photos of Grandpa and the motel in its heyday. Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love played through the drive-in speakers as Emily walked down an aisle weed created between the rows of cars. As we exchanged vows, I felt Grandpa's presence stronger than ever. The small brass room key around Emily's neck caught the fading sunlight, symbolic of everything we were building together. Our guests received little keychains with miniature replicas of the Sunshine Room keys, engraved with our wedding date, and the phrase, "Every journey needs a destination." I whispered to Emily as we shared our first dance. This is our Route 66, the road that will carry us forward together. Her smile in that moment, illuminated by the neon lights against the deepening twilight, is etched in my memory forever. The months that followed our wedding were a whirlwind of activity. My father, true to his word, oversaw the construction of the RV Park Edition, bringing it under budget and ahead of schedule. We never discussed Uncle Larry, who apparently had lost big in Vegas and was now trying to rebuild his real estate business in Arizona. The AARP tours became our bread and butter, bringing steady business even in the traditionally slow Florida off-season. Their travel magazine did a 10-page spread on Sunshine Americana, calling it a living monument to the American spirit of the open road, and an icon of preservation in an age of disposable experiences. Encouraged by the response, I launched a YouTube channel called Retro Revival, sharing what I'd learned about motel restoration, FHA 203K, loans, historical preservation grants, and marketing nostalgic experiences. To my surprise, the channel took off almost as quickly as our TikTok had, especially among other small business owners looking to revitalize struggling vintage properties across the country. One evening, about a year after our grand opening, I stood under a fully restored neon sign as the sun set. The vacancy portion was lit, though we actually had no vacancies, hadn't for months. We kept it lit because, as Grandpa used to say, a motel sign that says no vacancy might as well say no dreamers welcome. Emily joined me, slipping her hand into mine. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. I smiled. Just that Grandpa was right all along. Memories really are the only currency that never loses its value. She rested her head on my shoulder as the neon cast its warm glow over us. Speaking of currency that holds its value, I have news. She handed me an envelope containing a letter from a major hotel chain. They were offering to buy Sunshine Americana for a staggering sum. Enough money that neither of us would ever have to work again. They came by while you were in Orlando, she explained. So they want to create a chain of authentic retro experiences based on our model. I stared at the figures on the page, thinking about how my life had come full circle. A year ago, I'd spent every penny I had to save this place from being bulldozed by developers. Now those same corporate interests wanted to buy it, to replicate what we created. What do you think? Emily asked, watching my expression carefully. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I think Grandpa didn't build this place to be a prototype for a chain. He built it to be one of a kind. She smiled, clearly having anticipated my answer. That's what I told them. Later that night, I sat at the desk in our apartment above the motel office, looking over Grandpa's original sketches for Sunshine Americana, the theme park he dreamed of but never built, the vision that had been too ambitious for his time but might not be for ours. I added some notes in the margins, ideas that had been percolating for months. A vintage car showcase, a museum of American road travel, expansion possibilities for the neighboring properties. Outside, the neon continued to shine, a beacon for travelers physical and metaphorical, calling them home to a place where the past wasn't just remembered but lived. Maybe this wasn't the end of our story. Maybe, like Route 66 itself, it was just another bend in the road, with new horizons waiting to be discovered. I placed Grandpa's original key on top of the plans and smiled. Some people collect stamps or coins or vintage cars. Me? I collect dreams, the kind that shine bright enough to light up the Florida night sky, guiding travelers home for generations to come.